Hi chess enthusiasts, we've reached position number 11 in our Soviet 1 dozen chess puzzles, and in this position it's white to play and win. Black has a couple of extra pawns, but his king, as per usual, is not able to move that far. It can at the moment move to d5 and f5, and black's rook and bishop are not particularly active, whereas white's rook and minor piece can become quite active. So when I looked at this position, I thought, well, it's nice to have the rook on the c line. Rook c7 is definitely a possibility. Rook g1 also looks quite good. I would consider both of those in practical play and even in solving this. But there were two other moves that captured my attention before those two. And so if you want to play around, by all means, with rook c7 immediately or rook g1, go ahead. But the two in question, I'll give you what I consider to be the weaker line first. Although in practical play you could probably get away with it, but the stronger line second. I'll just move over to the pocket chess set, the same position. Any ideas what you'd play here? There are two possibilities in my opinion, and both of them target the king. In fact, the first one targets the king directly, the second one targets the rook and the bishop with the intention of heading towards the king. And neither of these two first moves that are available is made by the rook. So it's not rook c7, and it's not rook g1, it's not rook anything. Well, the move that interested me was this. Quite simply because you're trapping the king rather well. It's not in a position where it can move that far, is it? So it has two choices. It can go to either d5 or f5. Let's try f5 first and see what happens. Just take a look at that. Well, quite simply, we notice that these two here are in danger of being forked, and that's exactly what we do. Knight there. The king has to move here, king g4, and then of course white just plays here. And I think that everyone out there would agree that that is a winning position for white. In spite of these double pawns, these will go very shortly, and the rook and the knight against the bishop. So I think that's a losing position for black. So you could argue that that is one way of terminating this game. Although black does have another move. Let's put it back to the original position. After f4, instead of taking his king to f5, what happens if he goes to d5? Now the obvious move here, and it's the only really suitable move, is to play rook takes c7. Now white commands not only all the c line here, but also the 7th rank, which is pretty good. Now white is threatening mate on the move here. So black is forced into making just the one move to stop mate. Can you see the threat? Let's take a couple of seconds. Well, the threat is this, knight c3, mate. Now with the rook still on c1, this wouldn't have been possible because the king would have had a flight square. The knight would have been between the white rook and the black king. But with taking on c7 first, then knight c3 becomes quite a threat. So we can't allow that if we're black. So there's only one move that can stop it. The king needs a flight square. So this rook has to move. It can't move to here because rook e7 would take it. So it has to be rook e8. Now then a very interesting line, but I'm afraid it's flawed. And it's this, f5. It's cutting off the flight square here. It's attacking the bishop. Now the bishop has a choice. It can either move. It wouldn't do it any good moving to these two squares because the rook would just take it. So instead of capturing first, which is the better of the two moves, we'll just look at bishop h5. What happens then? Well, it's the fork in play again, knight f4, and it forks the king and the bishop. And clearly the king has to go to here. And when it does, we whip the bishop off. Knight h5. And if the king takes the pawn, the fork really works extraordinarily well because it goes to g7 and wins the rook and the game. That would absolutely terminate this game. But it's not quite as simple as that. This is why you, and I keep making this point, this is why you have to be extremely careful in these positions, that you get it absolutely right, because otherwise you would have a lot of egg on your face. We don't want that. So what we'll do is we'll just show why, although this looks a good move, after f4, king to d5, rook takes c7, and the rook moves back, and you play f5. This is the correct move. Accept the sacrifice. Now, in a game, especially if you were running a bit short of time, you probably wouldn't take it because you'd feel that the opponent had calculated rather well. And there is quite a good line here coming up, and I'll show it to you. So after bishop takes f5, we play knight f4. We don't want the king running away to e6. Now he only has one flight square there, so he has to go to e5. So the knight is protected by the king, but the king at the moment cannot move, yet again. It's good if you can stop the adverse king from moving. So white comes up with this rather ingenious move. What is he threatening here? Just take a look at it. Well, quite simply, he's threatening rook a5. And if d5, rook d5, and that's mate. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. That works very well indeed. So looking at that position, you think to yourself, well, that d pawn needs to be protected. So you could think black would need to go here, and that would be a fatal mistake, because white simply comes in here with check. King can't move. So he has to interpose the bishop. And then the rook takes the bishop. And then the king can move to f5. And then the rook takes the pawn. And again, that would be a winning position without a doubt for white. There's only one problem with this. Let's just take it back a moment. Okay, we've played f4 check. We've proven that king f5 certainly doesn't work, but king d5, rook takes c7, rook e8 to prevent knight c3, f5, he accepts the pawn, the knight comes into f4 check, the king goes to e5, and the rook goes to a7, threatening rook a5. This is cooked, I'm afraid, because this move comes into play, not rook d8. Now, it would be nice if the rook could play here, but with the bishop it can't. And it can't employ this down here because it needs this rook to be out of the way, so you can't play any of that. course, the only choice really would be this, but then the rook can get behind the pawn. Although the pawn can't move because it would be pinned, it's still, if anything, it's probably a winning position for black there. So I would say that on the basis of that analysis with d5 and its support, and he could even further support it like this and then eventually like this, I think you would have to say that that's probably pretty useful for black, especially when he gets his king out the way of being pinned. I wouldn't like to be playing white, I'd sooner play black. So I think in view of all of that, you would have to say that f4, although it looks a serviceable move, it's not good enough. It lacks the means to win this game because of that d5 business. So that's unfortunate, but we'll move on to what I consider to be the key move, which I think does force the issue. So that's the original position again. Can you see the key move there? White to play and win. In fact, really with this move you can win on the move, I'd say. I didn't see it at once. I saw it, the third choice. I saw rook takes c7, of course, because it's only natural, isn't it, that you'd want to pick up that pawn and take the 7th rank. Then saw rook g1. Then I saw it, but then I saw f4 check, and so f4 check interested me, but as can be seen, this is why you need to do an in-depth analysis of these positions. It doesn't quite work. And of course these problem creators know perfectly well that it doesn't work. If they get it right, there's only one solution. I'll give you a few seconds to see it, or pause the video. It is a pretty obvious move when you look at it. Okay, well the move in question is knight f4, and you're forking the rook and the bishop. Now there are a few defenses to this, if you can call them that. Of course, any rook move here or here, it loses the bishop with check, so that is out the question. If he moves this bishop anywhere, such as f7 or e8, you take the rook and you're winning the exchange. And after that you can just take this pawn here, so that's not really an option either. What else does he have? Moving the rook is out, moving the bishop is no good. Supposing he plays f5 so as to cover the bishop. Well, you can take the rook, and that's good enough to win, I would say. But you can also play here, and that's a double attack on the bishop. Where does the bishop go? Well, let's just say it goes here. You take the rook. He takes the knight, and the rook comes down and wins the bishop. Of course, the bishop could have gone to here, and it's protected by the king. In any event, though, I mean, this pawn is going to come off, and that one would take, and then white would take, and black would have a rook and pawn against a bishop or 2 pawns. And again, in my opinion, that is a winning position. I don't think there's any doubt about that. So that is no good either. So let's continue with this. Okay. So after knight f4, we've tried rook move, bishop move, and f5. What else is there? Well, clearly moving any of these pawns, such as d5, wouldn't achieve that much, because he'd just take the knight over to here, remove the bishop, and the king is in check, and he's won a whole piece. Where's the king going to go? It can go either to here or to here, but the knight simply comes back and attacks the rook. So I don't think that that's suitable. And if you think that the rook is a nuisance, even in that variation, you can always whip the rook off and then take the pawn down here. So really, white is still going to be able to win this is the beauty of knight f4. You have the opportunity to either win the whole piece or the exchange. The choice is very much yours. So we'll put that back. So there's only one really suitable move here, I think. Having looked at the possibilities there's nothing else that we can do other than, we can't move the king anywhere here or here. So if you want to play king f5, that's probably about the best move. I would say that knight f4 followed by king f5. Those are the main moves, the main line. So what does white do here? You take the rook again. In my opinion, taking the rook and then taking on c7 is a win. When I looked at this problem, I thought this is too easy really, because knight f4, it just really forces the issue straight away. What can black do against it? And I had to be sure that there were no tricks or anything, but I don't see any. And if you do, well, let me know. But I think the answer to that is, this is a move that we've played once or twice in these variations, rook g1. So you're keeping your options open. You're still hitting the rook, but it can move. But then you could, of course, take the whole bishop with your rook on g6, and that looks pretty impressive. And of course, should black decide, hang on a moment, I can take that pawn and give check, which of course he can, well, in that case we would have to whip the rook off, and you've won a whole rook, because the only way around getting something back for it is to take the knight, but then you lose the bishop. So you are a rook up with a pawn against 3 pawns, because you can take this one ultimately, and it wouldn't be too much of a hassle getting rid of the rest. So that is fine. So let's have another look. Right. So we're just back to the original position. We have everything as it was. We do. Okay. So it's knight f4. It's king f5, and it's rook g1. So what does white have here? If he moves the rook, like I say, then the whole bishop goes with the rook. You do have to be a little bit careful here though, because if he were to play something like this, what you wouldn't want to do is to do this. Because he could then take this, giving check with his rook. So you'd take it, but then you could grab yours, and you'd have a knight and 1 pawn against, once you take this, 3 pawns, and these are connected. So of course you'd have to do something about this. So I don't know. You just avoid taking with the rook. I think that's the easiest way. That's what I'd recommend, taking there with the knight, and you avoid all of that. I think knight takes e6 is always the option here, because to win the exchange is probably good enough. You can get a little bit too flashy and end up losing through an unnecessary oversight. So I think in that position, after knight f4, and he plays king f5, and you play rook g1, he probably would move the bishop rather than doing anything like this, recognizing that you just take the rook like that, and then really you end up with a whole rook, because if he takes the knight, you take the bishop with your rook. If he tries to save this, then you go after this pawn and it's all over. So really that's the end of it. So he'd probably retreat the bishop to here and just lose the exchange. So you take the rook and he takes back. And then you undouble your pawns finally, like so. And that, in my opinion, yet again, a rook and 2 pawns against a bishop and 3 pawns is probably enough to win the game. You have possibilities coming up here like this, and you can probably swing the rook around or put it on the 7th. I think that is a winning position for white. So white to play and win, I think that can be regarded as a winning game. I can't see anything better. Just revert to the magazine for a moment, and that's the original position. I think knight f4 there is pretty convincing. There's nothing that can really cook that. There's nothing that can pin the knight, and just by, like I've said a few times, taking the pawn here, once the knight's gone to f4, it can just whip the rook off. So there's no real problem there. There's nothing exposed with this bishop down here. The rook is not on b1, it's on c1. So I think that knight f4 has to be regarded as the key move there, and probably king f5 as the reply. But as can be seen when we look at this, what I'd say is the final position. This hasn't moved just yet, but I'd say that can be regarded as the final position in this main line, and it is a winning position. So I trust that you enjoyed that one. It's a different one altogether to the others, because you're not having to specifically finish the game in a certain number of moves. The draw that appeared in problem 10 is similar but different in the sense that there's no specific number of moves. You just have to find the moves that can convince you that, yeah, that's good enough. I don't think there's any other way around it. And if the problem creators had a different solution to that, then I honestly don't know what it is. I think that would be the one that I'd choose if I were entering such a competition, which I was too late to do, as I've already explained in a previous video. But I think that's good enough. And so we've one left, and that's number 12. So that will round everything off. And keep enjoying your chess, and we'll see what we can make of the final installment in this long-running little saga. Bye-bye for now.